can sing, born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for the morning, praise for them springing, springing fresh from the world.
Thank you, Julie and Craig. Welcome to this celebration of life, a place for laughter and where tears are a tribute to love. I'm the Reverend Leslie Takahashi, and I was honored to be one of Bob's ministers. This is a place today, this morning, where we can celebrate and hold with awe the wonder of what a person can make of a single life. A place where we share stories of this person who felt his passions for the world so deeply and then gifted the world with his passions. A man who agreed with the great naturalist John Muir that between every two pines is a doorway to a new world. And also an activist who believed with Bill McKibben that climate change is the single biggest thing that humans have ever done on this planet. The one thing that needs to be bigger is our movement to stop it. And a man who, despite being very serious and intentional about his life, also asked that his service have room for laughter. And so for this reason, we begin with a campfire joke. An adventurer was paddling on a lake during winter. Feeling a bit chilly, he decided to light a fire in his boat. He quickly discovered that you can't have your kayak and heat it too. However, if anyone could do so, Bob could. This time belongs to a life well lived, to a man who loved life. This time belongs to Bob Hanson.
Good morning. I'm Marianne Kessler. I want to welcome each of you to this celebration of life for your family member or friend, Bob Hanson. He might have been rather surprised, but nonetheless totally delighted to see all of you here. As you may have heard from the reading of his autobiography, Bob was precocious from the beginning. Bob's was a life lived with zest and purpose, and we're here to celebrate that. I would like to light the chalice with the following. These are the words of John C. Morgan. In the end, it won't matter how much you have, but rather how much you have given. It won't matter how much you know, but rather how much you love. And it won't matter how much you profess to believe, but rather how deeply you live the few few enduring truths you claim as ultimate. All the rest is discipline.
I have the honor and privilege to provide a little overview of Bob's life and to incorporate into that some people who loved him dearly who could not be here today. And so I've got some of their words here with me as well in this. There are so many words that we could use to describe Bob, and in the service, this formal service, we will not be able to touch on everything that needs to be said. So I just want to assure you that in the reception, we're also going to have a microphone for people that want to share a short story or anecdote about Bob as well. So do not despair. There can be more words after this as well. Bob was born on July 19th, 1931 in Bowbells, North Dakota, to Laura Fink and Fred Hanson, who were both from Minnesota and whose parents came from Norway and Denmark. In the family, Bob was number 2 after Doris, his eldest sister, who I hope has joined us on the stream this morning. And then came Irma and Lyle to follow. Doris remembers that their early childhood was spent during the Dust Bowl years and that life on a wheat farm was a tough time. Their father was a good farmer, but it was still tough, Bob's sister recalls. And Bob wrote in one of his books that 3rd grade was a milestone for me. I was fitted with glasses, caught smoking in the back of the school, skipped school to read stolen comic books, and engaged in other such forms of rebellion. He says, however, though, that a transformation occurred because he joined 4-H. Bob became a 4-H'er, and he had a prize calf who won at the county fair, which Doris remembers that he cried when he got a blue ribbon because it was going to be auctioned off to a restaurant. He had an early dream of being a cattle rancher. Doris recalled that in general, despite 3rd grade, Bob was a good boy, and that Bob the boy, like Bob the man, loved the outdoors. In the middle of World War II, Fred got a chance to sell the farm, and the family packed up and went to Washington State. His father died just a year later when Bob was entering high school, so Bob became the man of the house early on, as his mother set herself up as a florist to support herself and her 4 children. Bob found refuge in scouting, and Doris remembers that he was helped a great deal by a kind scoutmaster who Bob also wrote about in one of his books. Bob became an Eagle Scout at age 15. And he was also the first boy in his high school to take cooking, where he consistently also got the highest grades in the class. Bob excelled, Doris remembers, at almost all sports and even lettered in football, he says in one of his books. Despite what he called his diminutive size, he was a 48-pound guard. He was a leader in many things, including leading a 96-mile circumnavigation of Mount Rainier after his graduation from high school. This was the roots of Dr. Outdoors. With Bob, what you saw was what you got, Doris says. Bob went on to Washington State, worked his way through by living at Pine Manor, where his sister had gone before him to help him get settled. He did well. He worked at the YMCA there. He served as the president of the Student Y as a senior, and probably not surprising by this time. As Bob wrote in his last book, the Korean War was raging, and I was able to avoid it by staying in the ROTC. Drafted into the military, he was in the Signal Corps for 2 years, stationed in New York, where he could visit Sister Doris, who was living nearby. He wrote, I avoided Korea not because I was against the war, but because I was afraid of dying. By the time I finally got my officer's commission and reported for duty, the war was winding down and I never left the States. Bob also wrote that he was a failure as an officer, preferring to hang out with the enlisted men. Still, the GI Bill let him get a doctorate, and in fact, he and Doris and their brother would all go on to get doctorates, which was amazing from a family that began with the economic resources they had. On a few days' leave, he attended the yearly meeting of the YWCA in Asilomar, and that was where he met June Dawson, whom he soon married. After the Army, Bob took a job in Olympia, Washington as the Y director, and he and June launched their family with 3 children, Eric, Craig, and Chris. Bob was excited when he had a chance to become a professor of recreation at San Diego State. In the summers, his sister recalls, he worked for nothing for camps, but for the tuition for his 3 boys to attend. He was the owner of a summer camp and then was involved in the realm of real estate, sales of other camps. He wrote, "I began to be anti-war while teaching at San Diego State University in the mid-1960s while we were fighting the Vietnam War," but he also notes he was way too busy for activism. He was raising his family and working hard at teaching. Bob was also a scout leader extraordinaire. One of his former scouts, James Dowdy, recalled, "Mr. Hanson, as I always called him, was our scoutmaster of the Troop 180 in San Diego, California. In the early 1970s, he took all of us young teenagers on adventure after adventure, canoeing the Colorado River, hiking the mountains and the deserts, cross-country skiing at Mammoth Mountain, nighttime grunion hunting at Imperial Beach, and camping on the beach, even celebrating New Year's 1975 by doing a ski outing at midnight at the Tamarack Lodge." So many beautiful memories to recall and visit, Mr. Dowdy recalls. 50 years later, I am forever indebted to you, Mr. Hanson, for bringing so many wonderful moments to my life and learning and teaching me how important nature is. Our interconnectedness and dependence on it is a lesson you imbibed on us. Being responsible, happy, caring, and loving human beings is another. So thank you once again, Mr. Hanson. After his marriage to June ended in 1983, Bob took early retirement and moved to Northern California. He married his second wife, Lyda Dykes, in 1986, an event of which he wrote, "After a wedding, on a beautiful sandbar, I found the canoe to be unresponsive and sluggish. At the end of the trip, I found that my staff had tied 20 beer cans to the rear of the canoe. We were dragging a sea anchor." Through Lyda, Bob gained stepdaughters Leanne, Laura, Julie, and stepson Jack. And since Bob believed that couples should not be allowed to marry until they had backpacked, camped, canoed, and played bridge with their prospective spouse, all of the beginnings made sense. Bob did, as I mentioned, start and run numerous camps and a rafting company with what he called, beginning out, a few rubber ducky rafts. Bob was a leading figure in the new field of racial integration in youth camps before it even occurred to most people. He breathed life into the outings department of the California Alpine Club and led numerous base camp trips around the high Sierras. He was also the president of the Alpine Club for 2 years. We'll hear more about that in a little bit. In 1997, Bob and Lyda moved to Rossmore, and Bob began to write for the Rossmore News, as well as lawn bowling, bridge, and tennis. I guess they were still playing bridge, which was good. "I had now had time to be an activist," he wrote. "The San Francisco Bay Area was the center of the anti-war movement. I was arrested 3 times at the Livermore Labs." I think it was actually 4, because in his last book he mentions another time. But anyway, and served as the chair of the Mount Diablo Peace Center, and we have some Peace Center folks here today as well. He published, by 2019, he had published over 60 articles or op-ed pieces, mostly about peace, justice, or the environment. And he particularly enjoyed his collaboration on his last book with Duke Robinson, Eric Anschultz, and Rick Straley. Bob's focus became peacemaking in many forms, which his other friend Rick will speak about, and Bob wrote, "I plan on spending a good number of my remaining days here on Earth proving anyone wrong who says we cannot have peace on Earth, because I have a dream." He continued to be open to new ideas, recalling that his son had talked him into getting this thing he didn't want, which was called a computer, which then became a focus of his life. Bob was one of the founders of the Crosses of Lafayette to honor the U.S. soldiers who died in Afghanistan, and he also helped found the Rossmore Friends of the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center, was part of Sustainable Rossmore, and an early advocate for rooftop solar. in Rossmore. And he continued to enjoy the outdoors, riding his bike as an alternative to earth-damaging fuels. I remember my surprise to meet Bob on the canal trail by my house one day about 15 years ago in Martinez. And I said to him, "What are you doing all the way out here?" He said, "Oh, it's just a day for a short ride." Bob joined MDUUC in 1993, and here he was part of many groups, including the Peace and Green groups, and in his later years, he was a beloved member of the Elder Journey Circle, and many of their members are here as well. He was also the liaison between the church and the UUNO, and also worked with our international justice arm, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. We like to think of ourselves as the good guys Bob wrote about all his activism. I, for one, am not willing to accept the fact that my nation is perceived as a threat to world peace. As Lyda's health declined, Bob was attentive, working with Julie especially to be sure that Lyda was well taken care of and loved. Lyda's loss was devastating for Bob. He told me once that he didn't feel as if he could get over it. And his own health was also beginning to decline, and that was very frustrating for him because being active was a very basic part of who he was. Bob loved California and didn't want to leave, but he relocated several times to be closer to his son, Craig, and family. He came back and forth trying to find something that worked for him, and it was the care of his friends on this side and also Julie and family that really made a difference to him when he relocated. His younger sister had died in her 50s, and his baby brother Lyle died last summer. Bob and Doris and Lyle kept in touch all through their lives, even though Doris was often literally on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. Bob took pride in his children, his grandchildren, and his extended family. His grandson Marcus remembers him with these words: "Bob was a genuinely inspirational figure and a fantastic grandparent. He has helped me immeasurably and was always such an enthusiastic and kind man. Bob always had such a sense of adventure, and despite being in another country, I always kept in touch, and I have shared some great memories, both of him visiting me in the UK and seeing me swim. We did a brewery tour and various other things, and also came over to visit him in the US, where we went whitewater rafting, even though he was 88 at the time. He had great spirit, and I know he helped a lot of people in this world. He was an all-around legend, and I'll have fond memories of our time together." In his last years, Bob confronted increasing health challenges, as I mentioned. He suffered a stroke in 2022, and he had mobility issues afterward, though he still enjoyed outings with devoted friends and his return periodically to lawn bowling, which he always told me about. His son, Craig, and his stepdaughter, Julie, and his friends, including David Stanley and Mary Ann, were instrumental in helping him to be well. Bob died after a fall on November 24th. He was 92 years old, a man of many convictions who lived his values through and through. He leaves a legacy of care for this world.
I'm honored today to read these words from Eric Hanson, Bob's son. He and his family are sending their regrets as they had to cancel their trip here due to his wife Ingrid's hospitalization. But the good news is that she should be getting out of the ICU today. Here now are the words of Eric Hanson. Dad, in contrast to my mother, wasn't really into art and music, other than campfire songs and John Denver. His musical taste seemed to stop with Spike Jones about 1950. Yet, when the family spent the full summer of 1968 VW camper camping around Europe, he allowed us to spend 3 whole days at the Pop Art Festival in Kassel, Germany. He would always take us places, accidentally, that no one else would go. He took us 3 boys downtown to the Barber College to get 75-cent haircuts because they were $1.25 elsewhere. Back when nobody went downtown unless they had jury duty. I'm so glad that the historic preservationist in me got to see it back then. He needed a camera once for a Europe trip, so we drove 120 miles to Los Angeles to save $20 on one. This was the day that Dr. King was killed, and so we got to see the kind of street protests that we wouldn't have seen at home. Lots of situations like this. About the maddest I ever saw Dad as a kid was when he found out my 3rd grade teacher was using running laps on the field as discipline for bad behavior. He believed that outdoor activities should be fun and not punishment. When Dad was first a professor at San Diego State, he was called the guy with the bicycle because he biked to work. I recall there wasn't a single bike rack on campus back then. He made sure that we were thinking about the environment back before almost everyone else. We were recycling newspaper probably about 1963. I think there were probably only 2 places in town that you could do that then. We had to pick up street litter every day. Some days he would quiz us about what trash was found on the street. After 60 years, I still can't go a day without picking up at least 1 piece of somebody else's trash. He was the leading Western figure on the topic of racial integration of youth camps, back when no white people would have been thinking about that at all. When he was an accreditation judge for the American Camping Association, he would slip in questions about race and pretend that they were just part of the official protocol, probably 10 to 15 years before that was the case. Of course, he chose to use his talents to be on the board of directors for the local Jackie Robinson branch of the YMCA, back when any branch could have used his experience as one of only 1 to 2 professors of recreation in town. I know this has been a disjointed bunch of memories. Someday, I hope to write it all down coherently. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my dad's life.
I'm so grateful to hear Eric's words there. I didn't know any of those stories. It was I'm Julie, Bob's stepdaughter, one of 3. And it was 1981, and this might be the wrong date, hearing that June and Bob got divorced in 1983. But that was, I couldn't remember the year. Anyway, 1981 or thereabouts, that Mom and Bob became a dynamic duo. Am I too close to the mic? Okay. Starting a life of love and adventure together. They traveled across much of the globe visiting family and friends, leading walking tours in Cornwall, kayaking amongst mother whales and their calves in Baja, rafting or canoeing, I'm not sure which, in Belize, hiking in the backcountry of the Sierras, and more. Side by side, they raised signs of protest at rallies and marches, cooked, read aloud, played hours upon hours of games together, and ultimately took care of each other during the thin times, as long as they were able. Through their union, Bob came into my life, eventually becoming stepdad to my siblings and I in 1986. You'll hear repetitions, I think. He always welcomed us adult stepchildren into their home with open arms, which is not always the case with blended families. And it's something I never took for granted. I'm forever grateful to Bob for that. Take a break to cry. Feel free. Bob hired me to join all kinds of his adventurous projects as rafting guide, as one of 4 leaders of Northwest Wilderness Adventures, as crafts director at Mountain Camp 2, as campfire lead or co-lead on base camp trips, and evening program director at Teen Photography Camp. These ventures put me into the thick of rivers and mountains for a great portion of my years and made my life extraordinarily rich. Through Bob-led experiences, I met and befriended some of the finest people on earth, a blessing that continues to this day. I'm deeply grateful to Bob for shaping my life like that large meteor that impacted world climate eons ago. And this is an homage. I wrote at 4 a.m. the other night. Bob, flipping pancakes for the masses, for campers, for homeless, for family. Bob, mixing tuna on top of a cooler beside the Klamath River. Bob, pulling out boxed wines, gorp, and cheese, a man dedicated to happy hours beneath the granite peaks. Bob, stirring up graham cracker crusts in a metal bowl on a card table the mules hauled up. Bob, spooning out applesauce to my mother after she had her stroke. Bob, building crosses for the soldiers, singing songs of peace. Bob, digging up jokes weekly, a serious business, making lawn bowlers laugh. Bob, a man of verbs, not nouns. Bob did, believing things could be better, and always acting on that. Bob, stepdad? Nah. Bob, you were my bonus dad. Oh, and I'll sing a few more songs, and they're sing-alongs. They're meant to be joined if you know the words. The lyrics aren't provided, but you'll know a lot of them. One coming up. If I had a hammer. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning, I'd hammer out love between my brothers all over this land. Ooh, now I've got a hammer, and I've got a bell, and I've got a song to sing all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Ooh, ooh.
Hi, I'm David Stanley, a longtime member of this church and a friend of Bob. The first time I ran into Bob was not a personal encounter. It was over 40 years ago, and our kids were small, and we headed up to Northern California to the Trinity River near Willow Creek, to the campground where my wife spent many summers as a child playing in the river, only to discover that the campground had been sold to a professor from San Diego who had turned it into a river rafting center. Years later, after I met Bob here at MDUC in about 1992, I discovered that he was that darn professor. And though he had come between us and a riverside camp on the Trinity, I had later had 30 years of paddling and camping on rivers all over America with Bob to get to know him personally. I think Bob was at his happiest paddling a canoe, preferably with Lida, down one of America's wild and scenic rivers, with companions following behind. Bob loved everything about those trips, planning and organizing, selecting the route, finding outfitters, gathering participants, arranging the travel and meals, buying the provisions, leading the trip, selecting campsites, and of course doing it all as cheaply as he could. And let me tell you, those trips were a bargain. It was everything he loved. The freedom and opportunity to enjoy our wonderful natural world, to be self-sufficient, to invite others to enjoy it with him, to teach and to lead. And we love to tag along. And all my children, and eventually my grandchild with Bob on his last trip on the Eel River in May 2021, just a few months before the stroke that ended his canoeing and camping life. Rick was with us on that. How many other children and adults did Bob introduce to the life of the ranger, the woods, the river, and the camp? How many others, like all my own children, formed their own lifetime attachment to the sweetness of a quiet, remote river, the self-sufficiency in places far from human settlement, because they were introduced to it by Bob? Hundreds, maybe thousands, kids, students, employees, club members, church members, family and friends, many of us here today. What a gift he gave us. When he led us into the wild, it was not the modern way, with ultralight, high-tech, freeze-dried, solitary or expertly led outings. These were social events, with group cooking, with cast iron pots over campfires, cowboy coffee, box wine, peeling potatoes and chopping veggies on the bottom of an upturned canoe. Bob loved to lead, to bring people together and to take action. And not only in the world of camping and recreation where he had made his living and took his own enjoyment, but also when he determined to do what he could to make this world a better place, especially after he retired. I have no doubt that he did as he urged others to do in his writings, waking up every morning asking himself what he could do that day to make this world a better place for his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. To renounce war and abolish the horrific weapons that our society spends so much to develop. To reduce inequality and improve the lives of the disadvantaged. To live lightly on the earth. And to work for global government that can bring peace and prosperity to all the world's populations. He took leadership roles and initiated efforts in all the many organizations that he joined to advance these goals, including our church. And he took up his pen, his keyboard, and his telephone to urge others to do the same. Unfortunately, his stroke 2 years ago also ended that life when it robbed him of his ability to read and write and to live independently. And after his beloved Lyda died, Bob was lonely, restless, and sometimes demoralized. And after his stroke, he was frustrated and often expressed his unhappiness with his situation. I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with him during those last years, no longer as a canoeist and a cyclist, but as a companion to play Scrabble and dominoes, help with finances, keep him company up to the day of his death. But I never saw him give up trying. Up to that last breath, to cling to whatever independence and autonomy that he could. He was always ready for another change, outing, task, meeting, a game of dominoes, another step, including the last one that tripped him and gave him the head injury that ended his life. He did not go gentle into that good night. He took command of his life just the way he steered canoes down a strange river, following and relishing the flow of the current, steering and backpedaling where he needed, recovering from spills, always looking for just the right place to land, making sure that his companions landed safely. The last words I heard him say in the emergency room before he lost his ability to speak and after he firmly confirmed to the doctor that he did not want to be resuscitated was, "That's the way the cookie crumbles." Bob made friends and inspired many all through his life, and it was a privilege to join with others to repay that friendship and companionship during his last years. I thank him and those other dear friends for that opportunity. He is an inspiration and an example, and I miss him. And I do want to take this opportunity to thank Leslie and Travis. We often don't see what ministers do for pastoral care, and I got to watch them that last week, what they do. Loving companionship for those who are dying, frequently without family or friends, and I thank them too.
Hello, everybody. My name's Rick Sterling. I'm on the board of the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Can you hear me okay? Bob Hanson was a leader in the center for probably 15 or 20 years. I know he recruited me to the board, and he was chair of the board for many years. Did a great job. We had some tremendous events here. I can recall during the run-up to the Iraq War, we had a huge packed house here to hear Scott Ritter talking about what was wrong with the invasion, why the U.S. shouldn't invade Iraq, as it subsequently did. We had another event here a couple of years later talking about Palestine, which of course is in the news these days, but we had a very good event with a professor from USF talking with Congressman Garamendi at the time. And again, the house was packed. So Bob was a leader in the organization. He came up with creative ideas. He initiated many things, such as the marathon walk to the Lawrence Livermore Lab for the August 8th Day of Remembrance for Hiroshima. We walked from Walnut Creek to Livermore, spending the night at a church in in Blackhawk area. But those were the kinds of things that Bob initiated. He was very creative and a practical person, always positive, always friendly. And he initiated the group, the Rossmore Friends of the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center, which is hosting events in Rossmore and organizing in support of the center in Rossmore. And we had a meeting the other day, and we're going to be planting a tree in Rossmore in Bob's memory. So we're looking forward to that and having a nice plaque there in his memory. I was surprised as David was talking about being with Bob in the last days when he was here, and I learned things that I was completely surprised and shocked by because I had never heard him mention it. For example, it's nice to see Mike and Epi Ying, who are dressed in white, the lawn bowling colors. But Bob, I learned, led numerous delegations to New Zealand, to the UK, to Canada, of the lawn bowling team. He was an organizer, and he was so good at it. I remember I asked him once, because I've been on a few delegations myself, what he did when there were, anybody who's been on these know that you can easily have one or two people who are, creating some trouble or conflict, or they're a bit of a pain to have on board. And Bob just said, well, no, we didn't have any of that. So I don't know if he was just being friendly or if he was able to smooth over things totally, but that was how he was. There's a good movie out now. It's called The Bank of Dave. Has anybody seen it? Anybody seen it? Yeah, I recommend it. When I was watching that movie, I was thinking, well, The Bank of Bob, because the person, Dave launches a community bank in his town in the UK, and he was so positive. He was everybody in the community loved him, and he had big ideas, and he wasn't afraid to take on challenges. In this case, in the movie, we learned that they haven't had a new bank in the UK for 150 years, but that didn't stop Dave, and I was thinking. Bob was a little bit like that. He came up with creative ideas. He thought big, and he wouldn't, he'd give it his all. Another typical thing of Bob, he was so generous. He was thrifty, as Dave has correctly said, very thrifty, but in his warmth and in his friendliness, he was super generous. I remember introducing him to a friend of mine that Bob had never met before, and as soon as I introduced him, Bob said, well, any friend of Rick's is a friend of mine. So my friend was a little bit taken aback, but anyway, now I want to mention Bob was very keen in the Peace Center and in the church and in the Alpine Club and so many different organizations. He was also very keen in the Democratic World Federalists. And unfortunately, Roger Cotilla, who has a severely disabled daughter, he's not able to join us today. But I'll just say that Bob was very keen on that. For those of you who don't know, when the United Nations was created in 1945, they put in the charter that there was to be a review of the United Nations Charter in 10 years. And so the Democratic World Federalists think that it's high time. In fact, they're 65 years late in having this review and seeing what could be done to improve the effectiveness of the United Nations. And Bob wrote about this numerous times in the Rossmore News, and he had a very persuasive way. His articles were terrific there. It's wonderful to see the granddaughters here today, because Bob put together that book just a couple of years ago. So he was 90 years old when he compiled all these articles that had been published in the Rossmore News. And he said he primarily did it so that his grandkids might know who their grandfather was. And so that was, when I'm reading the book, as I've done a little bit over the last couple of days, I'm really reminded how good a writer Bob was. He had a very personable way of speaking. And seeing my friend Marvin here, Marvin had a nice way of putting it. He said when he went to the swimming pool and he had to wait a little bit for one reason or another for a lap to open up, he would have Bob's book, and he didn't have to start at the beginning. Anywhere he opened up the book, he would read one of these articles by Bob, and it was great. Which is a testament to how good a writer he was. So I think I'll leave it there for now. It was really, you know, some people make a big impact and we don't forget them. And they always have a positive impact. Well, that was Bob Hanson. Thank you.
Time to sing again. And, you know, I know we're sitting a long time. There's so much to say about Bob, as you can see, and you know probably. So if anybody wants to stand up, we're going to sing the Happy Wanderer song. And it's a song that you sing when you're hiking down the trail. If you want to move a little bit, go ahead. If you don't know it by the title, sorry, I'm having a hard time bending over where there's a mic at my guitar. Is it possible to move the guitar mic back so I can stand? Thank you. The part that you will recognize, whether you know it or not, is, thank you, is it goes Valderie, Valdera, Valderie, Valdera, ha 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 ha. So, okay, you'll know. I love to go wandering along the mountain track, and as I go, I love to sing with a knapsack on my back. Valderie, Valderie, Valdera, Valderie, Valdera, ha 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 ha, Valderie, Valdera, a knapsack on my back. So I'm the one making all the mistakes today. I'm playing all the wrong chords, so nobody else has to. Let's see. I wave my hat to all I meet, and they wave back to me. And blackbirds call so loud and sweet from every greenwood tree. Let's hear it loud. Valderie, Valdera, Valderie, Valdera, ha 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 ha, Valderie, Valdera, round every greenwood tree or a knapsack. I love to wander by the stream that dances in the sun. So joyously it calls to me, come join my happy song. Valderie, Valderie, Valdera, Valderie, Valdera, come join my happy song. Last verse. Oh, may I go a-wandering until the day I die, and may I always laugh and sing beneath a peaceful sky. Valdrie, Valdera, Valdrie, Valdera, Valdrie, Valdera, beneath a peaceful sky. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lori. Can you hear me? I'm not Ruth that was on the board. I'm sorry Ruth couldn't be here today. She's a longtime friend of Bob's, and my relationship to him is that my mother was married to Lida's brother. So Bob begrudgingly owned me as his shirt-tail niece, and I'll take it. So this is from Ruth. Bob was a longtime member of the Alpine Club, a hiking and outdoor activities group that's over 110 years old. Bob was the guide to outdoor adventure for me and many club members. Every year, he led a mule-supported trip into the high Sierras. Our gear would be carried in on the mules to a beautiful lake, and we'd have 5 days of splendid alpine hiking, fishing, and wonderful meals prepared by Bob. At night, there'd be a campfire with stories and music. Also, each year, he would take members canoeing on a wild and scenic river in a western state. We honed our canoe skills and faced underground rocks or rapids. Bob always got us out in one piece. One year, the water was running too fast for safety in the John Day River of northern Oregon. Bob rented rafts, and he and Craig shepherded us through 2 days of wild water. Bob ran a tight ship. Your gear had to be at the water's edge, ready to go at the appointed time. The hikes left as scheduled, and you'd better be there if you wanted to go. But he loved and respected his trip members. He regaled us with stories and corny jokes, prepared individual omelets and endless pancakes at breakfast, and encouraged his ancient cooking equipment to perform one more time. Over the years, dozens of us learned to be comfortable in the wilderness and to grow the spirit of adventure. Thank you, Dr. Outdoors.
So I thought it was fitting that Bob loved the outdoors, so I thought it was fitting that I make this small tribute to him in the mountains beside our house and a snowy cold day here in Vermont. I first met Bob in January of 1975, and he asked me to work as a camp counselor at Camp Canocti. That changed my life. I continued working with children and learned a lot from his example. Bob loved the outdoors, he loved recreation, and he saw the wisdom of peace and diplomacy, and he worked hard through his actions and deeds to convince people that weapons were not solutions to problems. He has passed, but I think he still lives with all of us, and I'm just happy that I got to know him and have him as a part of my life. My name's Keith Boniface. wish you all the very best.
Bob wrote, "We all need a role model or a mentor. I've had several very important ones in my life. One of them, Mary Harris, died recently," he wrote at the time of this writing. Mary passed 49 days short of her 101st birthday, and I served with Mary on the board of World Federalists. Mary is gone but not forgotten, and each day I ask myself what I can do to contribute to her dream, a world without war. Bob was perhaps a mentor to more people than most people know in a life. And so as we watch these pictures of his life and its achievements and listen to these camp songs, which Scott Schrader will play in his honor, let us take our hearts into our hearts one more time all that Bob was and all that he cared about with such deep passion and conviction, because perhaps some part of us can carry forward what he loved, for that would be what he would want. He wrote, "In order to have a happy life, one has to feel that their life has meaning. To me, this means giving back to others and leading a balanced life. And another secret to happiness is spending time with people important to you and whose company you cherish." Let's watch these images. Thank you, Scott. Now, Bob would not want this formal part of remembering him to go on even this long. In his instructions, which he did write out for this celebration of life, he said there should be, and I quote, lots of box wine. And I need to tell you that the word lots was underlined multiple times. Because Bob was a person who appreciated the interchange between people and did not like to stand on ceremony. For these reasons, let us have a few more beautiful pieces of music, and we're so grateful to Julie for all the music she's provided, and Scott as well. And then let us end this formal part and move into the reception where others will be, as I said, invited to attend and also to share briefly and brief stories. I want to end today, this part of the speaking, with Bob's own words, and let his spirit be an inspiration to all of us. These are the words of Bob Hanson. I know what I can contribute is minuscule in the big picture, but if enough of us do something to bring about lasting peace on earth, maybe it will happen. So may we leave this place determined to continue Bob's work for a more peaceful world.
I have water on my glasses. If you know it, sing along. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room, and it was filled with women and men. And the papers they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when the papers all were signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayers were prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and guns and swords and uniforms lay scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamt the world had all agreed to put an end to war. And at mountain camp long ago, we used to sing a song at the end of our campfires with living in tents and cabins. And the original lyrics say, living in tents and cabins under the watch of God. Well, here's how we did it at mountain camp. living in tents and cabins under the watch of Bob. He made the pathways that our feet have trod. We live to love and love to live for all these wonderful things. Oh, boom-de-yada, 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 boom-de-yada day. A life of sharing and a chance to give, friendships that last as long as we shall live. We live to love and love to live for all these wonderful things. Boom-de-yada, 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 boom-de-yada day. We won't sing the last part, day is done. Day is not done. I think we're ready to move on. Thank you.